Imagine a ruler, not a fairy tale Prince Charming, but a real one, grappling with scheming nobles, restless citizens, jealous neighbors, and the constant chilling fear of losing his head along with his throne. Over 500 years ago, Niccolò Machiavelli, a sharp-eyed Florentine diplomat who'd seen power plays up close and suffered when they went wrong, wrote a brutally honest handbook for such a prince. Forget tales of noble knights. His book, The Prince, was a survival guide for the real, messy world of politics. Its core message? To stay in power and keep his state stable, a leader must be ruthlessly practical. Forget what should be nice. Focus solely on what actually works. This isn't about being cartoonishly evil. It's a cold, clear-eyed look at how power operates when the stakes are life and death. Think of it as the ultimate dose of tough love for leaders. Machiavelli watched rulers like the infamous Cesare Borgia, a man who used charm, cunning, betrayal, and violence in equal measure, and distilled their successes and bloody failures into blunt, often shocking principles. His name became synonymous with political cunning and cold realism, Machiavellianism. Let's unpack these ideas with simple language and real-world parallels you can recognize. The most famous and often misunderstood idea is the ends justify the means. Machiavelli argued that the only thing that truly matters for a prince is achieving and holding on to power to maintain the state's stability and security. If an action, even one that seems cruel, dishonest, or morally ugly, is the only way to secure that vital goal, then it is justified. He wasn't saying cruelty is good. He was stating it can be an unavoidable necessity for survival. Think of a surgeon faced with a gangrenous leg. The amputation is brutal, traumatic, and causes immense suffering. But the end goal, saving the patient's life, justifies that drastic, painful means. For a prince, this might mean swiftly and publicly executing a handful of rebellious nobles. It's harsh, it's frightening, but if it prevents a full-blown, devastating civil war that would drown the entire kingdom in bloodshed and chaos, then the harsh act is justified. The end, peace and stability for the vast majority, outweighs the cruel means, eliminating the few plotters. See it in a modern boardroom. A new CEO takes over a company teetering on bankruptcy, threatening thousands of jobs. To save the entire organization, she makes the agonizing decision to lay off hundreds of employees immediately. It's devastating for those individuals and families, causing real hardship. But if this brutal cut is the only way to stop the company collapsing entirely, saving the majority of jobs in the business itself, the CEO justifies it by the larger, necessary end, survival. Machiavelli would nod grimly, seeing it as an unpleasant but essential act of leadership. This principle naturally bleeds into the next. Appearance versus reality. Machiavelli famously advised that a prince must master the art of seeming virtuous, generous, honest, merciful, deeply religious, while being ready to ditch the actual practice of these virtues the moment they threaten his hold on power. Why? Because people judge based on appearances. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are, he wrote bluntly. A prince needs a glowing reputation to keep people loyal, attract allies, and scare off enemies. But genuinely being virtuous all the time could be his downfall. Always being generous could bankrupt the treasury, forcing him to impose crushing taxes that turn the people against him. Machiavelli's solution? Appear incredibly generous, throw lavish public festivals, make grand charitable gestures everyone sees, while actually being stingy and careful with the state's coffers behind the scenes. Or cultivate an image of boundless mercy, but when absolute necessity demands it, like crushing a violent uprising, act with terrifying ruthlessness. Then crucially, immediately justify it publicly as a tragic but unavoidable act for the greater safety and good of all. Think of a politician campaigning passionately on promises of peace, diplomacy, and international cooperation, the carefully crafted appearance. Once elected and faced with an imminent terrorist threat, they authorize a deadly drone strike, the harsh reality demanded by circumstance. They then rush to manage the narrative, framing the strike publicly as a heartbreaking but absolutely essential act of defense to protect innocent lives and preserve future peace. Or imagine a popular store manager who constantly praises teamwork, collaboration, and open communication in staff meetings and newsletters, the positive appearance everyone sees. Privately, when making critical decisions about budgets, promotions, or firing underperformers, they rely solely on cold, hard data and make tough, unilateral calls without committee input, the pragmatic reality needed for the store's performance. They maintain staff morale through the positive image while doing what they believe is necessary for results and survival. This connects tightly to another cornerstone: fear versus love. Given the brutal choice, Machiavelli stated plainly, "It's far safer for a prince to be feared than loved, if he cannot manage to be both." Why? Love depends entirely on the unpredictable goodwill of the people. It can vanish overnight if times get tough or a better offer comes along. Fear, however, is rooted in the deep, primal dread of punishment, something the prince controls through his laws and his army. People are far less likely to plot, betray, or try to overthrow someone they genuinely fear. But here's the critical catch. The prince must avoid being hated at all costs. Hatred is the fuel that eventually unites people against him, making them willing to risk everything for revenge. How does a leader inspire fear without tipping into hatred? Machiavelli's advice was surprisingly specific. Keep your hands off your subjects' property and their women. People might reluctantly accept the execution of a troublesome relative if framed as necessary justice, but they will never forgive the theft of their land, their inheritance, or the violation of their family's honor and safety. A feared ruler is obeyed out of self-preservation. A hated ruler inspires desperate, determined rebellion. Think of a strict but respected high school principal. Students generally follow the rules, not necessarily because they adore her, but because they fear the consistent, predictable consequences, detention, suspension, calling parents that she reliably enforces. But if that principal starts confiscating students' personal phones permanently for minor infractions, or publicly humiliates them unfairly, that healthy fear curdles into intense hatred. Students become defiant, parents complain, and efforts to remove her gain momentum. In the corporate world, a department head known for holding everyone strictly accountable for missed deadlines or sloppy work, inspiring fear of professional consequences, might run a highly efficient team. However, if that same boss is seen as taking credit for subordinates' ideas, making personal insults, or firing people capriciously, they become deeply hated. This leads to plummeting morale, high staff turnover, passive-aggressive resistance, and even deliberate sabotage, the direct results of crossing the line from fear into hatred. Machiavelli hammered home the need for adaptability and pragmatism. The successful prince cannot be a prisoner to dogma, rigid ideology, or even his own natural inclinations. He must be a political chameleon, constantly shifting his colors and tactics to match the terrain of changing circumstances. If fortune smiles and brings peace and prosperity, he can afford to be generous, merciful, and rule with a lighter, more popular touch. But if fortune turns fickle, bringing war, internal conspiracy, famine, or chaos, he must instantly shed the velvet glove and be ready to act with iron-fisted decisiveness, even cruelty. He shouldn't seek out evil acts for fun, but he must be mentally prepared and practically capable of using harsh, even morally questionable methods when the situation demands it for the state's survival. A prince whose nature is gentle and merciful might need to consciously suppress that instinct to ruthlessly crush a brewing rebellion before it explodes. Conversely, a prince naturally inclined towards harshness might need to force himself to show unexpected mercy and forgiveness after defeating a rival, to consolidate power, win over former enemies, and prevent future resentment. Imagine a mayor governing a peaceful city. Normally, they focus on community input, consensus building, and democratic processes for decisions. Then, a massive hurricane slams into the coast. Overnight, the situation demands a complete shift. The mayor starts issuing rapid unilateral orders, mandatory evacuations, commandeering resources, deploying emergency services without lengthy debate. They know swift, decisive action, even if it bypasses normal procedures and ruffles feathers, is the only way to save lives. Once the floodwaters recede and the immediate crisis passes, the mayor can shift back to the more collaborative style. Or picture a football coach. He loves a wide-open, aggressive passing offense. It's his identity. But in the championship game, the opposing defense completely shuts down his star quarterback. By halftime, his team is getting crushed. The pragmatic coach, swallowing his pride, abandons his beloved strategy. He switches to a conservative, run-heavy, defensive game plan he personally dislikes. Why? Because the end goal, winning the championship, justifies the means of ditching his preferred style. He adapts to the brutal reality on the field. The importance of military power and self-reliance was absolutely foundational for Machiavelli. A prince's strength rests on two pillars: strong laws and strong arms. But crucially, he argued, a ruler must ultimately depend on his own forces, an army made up of his own loyal citizens, trained and ready to defend their homeland. Mercenaries, hired soldiers, or auxiliaries, troops borrowed from an ally, are fatally unreliable. They fight for money or for another master, not out of loyalty to the prince or his state. They might desert when the fighting gets tough, demand exorbitant pay raises, switch sides, or even turn their weapons against him. Machiavelli saw relying on others for defense as a fundamental, potentially fatal weakness. A prince must also be a skilled student of warfare himself. It's not just about launching attacks, it's the essential skill for maintaining power against constant threats, internal and external. Think of a tech startup founder. Relying entirely on outside contractors for their core software development, like mercenaries, is incredibly risky. Those contractors might leave abruptly for a higher-paying gig, demand unreasonable fees once they know the startup is dependent, deliver shoddy work, or even steal the code for a competitor. Building a strong, skilled, dedicated internal engineering team, like a citizen army, even if it takes longer and costs more upfront, creates a far more secure and reliable foundation. Or consider a small nation that historically relied entirely on a powerful neighbor for its defense. If that powerful neighbor suddenly changes its foreign policy, demands unpopular concessions, or gets distracted by its own problems, the small nation is left helpless and vulnerable. Investing heavily in building its own capable, independent defense force, however modest, is a deeply Machiavellian act of essential self-reliance. On a personal level, it's the difference between relying solely on a wealthy parent's allowance, which can be cut off at any time, versus working hard to build your own skills, career, and financial independence, your personal army for navigating life's challenges. Finally, Machiavelli insisted on a clear-eyed understanding of human nature. His view was decidedly pessimistic. He believed people are, generally speaking, self-interested, ungrateful, fickle, deceitful, and cowardly when real danger appears. They will enthusiastically support you when things are going well and benefiting them, but they'll abandon you instantly at the first whiff of trouble or if someone offers them a better deal. A wise prince doesn't build his rule on naive hopes of inherent loyalty or deep-seated goodwill. He bases everything on the cold assumption that people will act according to their perceived self-interest nearly every time. His job is to use rewards, favors, promotions, wealth, and punishments, fines, demotions, imprisonment, execution, strategically to shape and channel that self-interest in directions that benefit the stability of the state and, consequently, his own continued rule. He understands that promises and treaties are only kept as long as it serves the other party's interests. Therefore, he must always be prepared for betrayal and have plans ready to counter it. Think of managing a large, complex project with team members from different departments. Some might enthusiastically agree to ambitious deadlines during planning meetings, but without clear accountability, constant monitoring, and known consequences, some will inevitably slack off, miss deadlines, or deliver subpar work, acting in their immediate self-interest, less effort. The effective project manager who understands this Machiavellian reality doesn't rely on goodwill. They set crystal-clear milestones, track progress relentlessly, implement tangible consequences for failures, like being removed from the project or impacting bonuses, and offer meaningful rewards for success, recognition, prime future assignments. They structure the project so that individual self-interest aligns with project success. Or look at international relations. Nations frequently sign grand treaties of friendship and mutual defense. A Machiavellian leader understands these are based purely on overlapping interests at that specific moment. If the geopolitical landscape shifts dramatically, say new resources are discovered, or a powerful new enemy emerges, yesterday's steadfast ally might abandon the treaty without a second thought if it serves their new interests. They don't take the flowery language of diplomacy at face value. They constantly reassess other nations' current motivations and capabilities, knowing promises are temporary, while maintaining their own nation's strength is the only permanent safeguard. Machiavelli's The Prince remains controversial centuries later because it ruthlessly strips away the comforting fairy tales we often prefer about leadership and power. It paints a picture of the world not as we wish it were, but as Machiavelli, scarred by exile and the violent politics of Renaissance Italy, observed it to be: a dangerous, unpredictable arena where survival demands unflinching pragmatism, constant vigilance, decisive strength, and a willingness to make choices that clash violently with traditional ideals of morality. His prince's grin is that knowing, slightly grim look of someone who has peered behind the curtain and understands the brutal, often ugly rules of the power game. He isn't necessarily championing mindless tyranny. He argued that a stable, secure, well-ordered state, even if achieved through harsh methods, was vastly preferable to the horrors of constant civil war, invasion, and chaotic collapse. The lessons, peeled away from their specific 16th century context, echo loudly today. We see Machiavellian calculations in the high-stakes maneuvers of politicians navigating international crises or domestic scandals, carefully weighing image against action. We see it in the agonizing decisions of CEOs restructuring failing companies, balancing survival against loyalty and fairness. We see it in the delicate strategies of diplomats trying to broker fragile peace deals between ancient enemies, knowing trust is fleeting and interests reign supreme. We even glimpse it in the smaller dramas of everyday life, managing difficult colleagues, navigating office politics, or making tough choices for our family's security when ideals collide with harsh reality. Machiavelli forces a deeply uncomfortable question. When the survival of something vital, a nation, a company, a community, even a family, hangs in the balance, how far is a leader obligated to go? His unsettling answer is that sometimes the prince must be willing to dirty his hands, to choose the lesser evil, to act decisively and even harshly, if that's the price of securing the realm against chaos. The grin is the quiet acknowledgement of that hard, inescapable truth. It's the understanding that wielding power effectively in the real world rarely involves pure white knights. It operates in complex, shifting shades of gray, demanding choices that prioritize survival, stability, and results above comforting but potentially dangerous idealism. Whether we find his realism admirable or appalling, Machiavelli's stark vision offers a timeless, if deeply uncomfortable, lens for viewing the relentless, often brutal, pursuit and preservation of power in any age. The prince's grin endures because the game he describes still plays out, day after day, on stages large and small,